What's up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here. This is going to be a very different video to what I would usually do when it comes to Slipknot. And besides that, I have decided to permanently move on from the whole Jay Weinberg scenarios. This time, I've decided to make a video based on one of the founders and original bassist for the band, Paul Gray. Now, I will have to say this. I'm going to speak the truth. A few nights prior to think about doing the video in the first place, I have watched the two separate tribute videos from Slipknot's official YouTube channel to Joey and Paul, watched the ending of the Sonosphere show being very emotional, and when I was looking at Paul Gray, I was listening to the instrumental version of Danger Keep Away, looking at one of the posters, seeing the faces of Paul and Joey. As I was listening to the track, I was crying for like over 5 minutes. I am very, very grateful to see this classic lineup of the band only one time on the 7th of December 2008 at the NIA during the All Hope Is Gone tour. Paul's life has been incredibly shocking and devastating, so this is my discretion from me to you. If you're very sensitive around subject matters on mental health and addiction, don't watch the video. But for those of you who are interested, feel free to join in. But it is not at all a bright-hearted experience throughout Paul's life and the career of his for being Slipknot's bassist from 1995 to 2010. So this is going to be my biggest chance of trying to make a video like this justice. I know I'm waffling on at this point, but I hope you guys will enjoy it nonetheless. Paul Dedrick Gray was born on the 8th of April 1972 in Los Angeles, California. Around Paul's early childhood and upbringing, his family did not go into a lot of positivity because they went through a lot of the homelessness, being very broke, and the worst thing ever that did affect Paul heavily was the passing of his father due to suicide. His older brother Jay was the one who got him introduced to love of music, getting into classic bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Alice Cooper, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, to name more than a few. The first album Paul ever got on vinyl was the debut self-titled album from Suicidal Tendencies. And when he was in his early teens, in the 1980s, he did see a rising metal band that would eventually be taking the world by storm, Slayer, on the Hell Awaits tour. That Slayer show made a very big, impactful moment for him, as it grew his admiration of wanting to be a full-time musician. He decided to self-teach all by himself with the electric guitar, being his first instrument. He was learning the different kinds of songs, records that was coming out through his record player system, never took guitar lessons at all, and his mom decided to buy him his first ever Gibson, which is a Gibson Flying V, a left-handed Flying V. Over time, at the age of 14, in the teenage years, Paul was completely all on his own, and just like his past, experiencing homelessness, had different phases with friends as well as with going to different places. He sadly sold his Flying V guitar to someone Paul thought was a friend of his. However, it was not meant to be. The seller turned out to be a drug seller, which got Paul introduced to speed, which is slang for methamphetamine. At the age of 16, he was living inside his own apartment, and by 17, he created his first ever band, Sudden Infant Death Syndrome, which is basically like a covers band, if you like, because he was playing along through metal songs from Metallica, Danzig, etc. And later on, his mom managed to have a house at a different state, which is Des Moines, Iowa. So Paul decided to pack everything and go over there, stayed there, lived with his mom inside the house, and that is the moment where he becomes a resident of living in Des Moines, Iowa for the rest of his life. After his move to Iowa, Paul is completely new of where everything was, not knowing a single soul there. He went to a record store because he overheard words of somebody wanting a bassist for a band. Paul decided to join in, despite that he did not have a bass guitar with him and had no money to afford one in the first place. So he went to a rehearsal space and borrowed a bass guitar that was belonging to one of Paul's brother's friends. He then proceeded to flip the bass guitar upside down, restring it, and play it like a left-handed bass. And that was the moment after playing along to the music he was welcomed to be the bassist for a band called Vex, with band members of Anders Kolsefny and Josh Brainard. Paul decided to continue learning different songs with the bass guitar, and to know that it was a completely different experience of playing music with a bass guitar than an electric guitar. He fell in love with the bass guitar, and he decided to be a hard-working, very dedicated bassist. The Des Moines, Iowa metal scene is completely packed with different bands, and future members of Slipknot would be involved later on into the story. The bands were gigging heavily around the scene. Paul and Anders then decided, with the involvement of Donnie Steele and Mick Thompson, to create a death metal band called Body Pit. After some recordings with some material, Paul got together with a member of a band called Modifidius, a drummer by the name of Joey Jordison. Both Paul and Joey decided to become friends by creating a band of their own called Anal Blast. That was the beginning of their very special, long-time close friends friendship. Paul at some point went down to Los Angeles, and both Anders and a founder of a funk metal covers band, Heads on a Wall, by the name of Sean Cran, decided to bring Paul back. Paul was my biggest influence when he came into the band. He brought the knowledge and the enthusiasm, and he was the most social of all the people on the metal scene. He was the sort of person who, when he got his meager paycheck from working at the gas station, would go down to the bar and spend it all buying people drinks. He was loved around that scene. There's a ton of the experiences for Paul to be around with demo recordings with these musicians, writing and recording stuff inside Paul's basement. Some of the stuff would become very early beginnings of a new band, which I will be mentioning at this point right now. Then a moment of Paul being around with these people, of Josh, Donnie, Anders, Joey and Sean. They decided to form a band called Meld, with the repertoire that they've made so far. They performed a gig, and it was the only time Donnie Steele played live with these guys. By late 1995, with much of the band's agreement, Joey decided to call the band Slipknot. This leads to the point through the era of Slipknot to become increasingly busy by writing more material and develop their very first demo of Mate, Feed, Kill, Repeat. I'm not going to detail a ton of this era on this video because I've decided to potentially make a video around the very early days, the Mate, Feed, Kill, Repeat era, and through loads of different things, and again, it's going to be very, very busy work, so keep an eye out for that. But what I will say is around this bit, through demo recordings, the ideas of the identity of the band, to the release of the demo, made 1,000 copies of it, making friends in the music industry, multiple lineup changes and departures, Paul delivered his dedication through all of the intensity of work and to play through his professionalism of his bass playing and his musicianship. The band's manager, who was a local radio DJ, Sophia John, friends with Ross Robinson, producer for bands like Limp Bizkit, Korn, as well as Sepultura, decided to see the band live. He was blown away by their performances. Many months passed. The band were offered a record contract with Roadrunner Records, and by July of 1998, with newer members of Mick Thompson and Sid Wilson, and before Chris came into the band, Slipknot was signed. This would be the beginning moment for the band to increase a lot of productivity as they were signed to make their debut album. Sophia John asked us, if you could have anybody hear you, who would it be? And we said, Ross Robinson. So she sent him our demo, and Ross agreed to come out and see us. And once you get one label guy to come in, everybody says, I don't want to miss the train. So every week we had somebody checking us out. We were going out to dinner with these fucking A&R people, and it fucking sucked. The only person who was actually honest and real was Ross. He was doing an imprint with Roadrunner, so we signed this deal with them. Slipknot then were becoming extremely busy making the debut album in California, but throughout the experience, it was so intense and dark by most of the band, including the producer of Ross Robinson. Ross wanted it to come across like how we played live. So, as we were standing there playing riffs, he would push us and knock the guitars out of our hands and yell, "You can play that shit harder." Next thing you know, we're moving around and playing our asses off, and that's how we got the aggression on that first album. With Slipknot, my bass playing is a little more laid back and subdued. We have 3 drummers, there's a lot of low end, do you know what I mean? You gotta find your pocket. I have to find my place in Slipknot and stay away from just following the guitars, so I play along with what the drums are doing. Some of it I tap out, some of it is more simple, and some of it I have to follow the guitars and do runs and leads and stuff like that. I try not to step on anybody's toes, but try not to get lost either, which is a hard thing to do with the 9 people in the band. The self-titled debut studio album was released on June 29th, 1999. It was a monstrous release, and it became the fastest and biggest selling Roadrunner debut of all time. The rising attraction of Slipknot grew everywhere. Slipknot were becoming metal giants, but the madness from the band members continued to grow, no matter wherever they go and whatever they do, heavily assaulting the instruments, setting themselves on fire, a ton of drug taking and drinking, and bringing their self-hatred stage presence completely was attracting many audiences worldwide. After the self-titled album era was completed, the next one for the band was without a single question the most volatile, damaging and brutal period in Slipknot's history, which was the Iowa album making. Not only the music was massive, complete destruction through the tones of performance to the sound of the band and production, during the development, everybody in the band were hating each other. It was such a toxic environment, and the album, just like what happened with the self-titled debut, with again the involvement of Ross Robinson, the producer, it was nothing but chaos. It's funny, man, because I wasn't in that bad of a headspace. I just felt like we needed to get the record done while there was still some momentum going. But Sean has a family and some of the guys felt burnt out, and everyone was partying a bit more than they should have. Going into the record, I started doing lines of coke all the time and writing music doing lines. But I thought everything was cool. We moved into Sound City Studio and did Iowa, which I love. But I think we could have spent more time at home relaxing and putting it together more as a band. Iowa was released on August 2001, 2 years after the debut. It went to #1 in the UK, and it escalated Slipknot even higher, and they grew and grew in popularity. They were becoming a well-regarded, praised and powerful band. The album became a document for the band in personal and difficult aspects, but it was one of the most acclaimed albums in metal history. Iowa was described by many fans of the band as their best album and as one of the greatest metal albums of all time. Besides the higher growing success, the band was still aggravated with every one of themselves while on tour. Corey Taylor and Jim Root then decided to come back to their previous band, Stone Sour. Paul shared his feelings around that, but what was even worse was the beginning of his heavy, mentally hard drug addiction. I was pissed. I thought, fuck, we should be working on Slipknot. But now that I think about it, it was perfect because it gave Slipknot some time apart. We were sick of fucking looking at each other. It was a long, hard time for me, but it was definitely for the better for the band. During the downtime, I played with Unida and just jammed with friends. I didn't do much of anything. A lot of drinking, some drugs, heavy drugs, heroin. I was shooting speedballs every day and then pills. I was on everything, man. The Disaster Pieces DVD was all that was happening with the Knot. In the beginning, I had my shit under control, but after a while, no. I became an addict. They began their first hiatus, and most of the part of the problem was not only through the commitments that the rest of the band have been doing their own side projects, but they were so sick of each other, and that was such a big reason. Corey and Jim went back to Stone Sour, Joey created Murder Dolls with Wednesday 13, Sean Cran created To My Surprise, and Sid went on to become a solo artist called DJ Starscream. The band got back together again in 2003. Paul and Joey were very committed to write new material for a follow-up to Iowa, which would become Volume 3, The Subliminal Verses. The band went to work with a well-known producer, Rick Rubin, who produced the albums for Slayer, Beastie Boys, Metallica, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Johnny Cash, an endless amount of artists that he worked with. Despite that, Corey shared his negative experiences around the album's development and to not really get together with Rick Rubin most of the time. The material on Volume 3 is obviously a combination of both the heavy tones and the softer, cleaner tones. Paul said himself that it was the beginning of the maturity after what the band went through. It was the rebirth of Slipknot. It was like us coming back together, pushing out the vibe that had gotten in there and kind of started pulling people away. But we figured out that, we do have to get space, we do need to let people be sometimes. During the completion of writing material to then recording the Volume 3 album, the relationship between the band had become different because in their own separate private lives, the rest of the band had experienced their own difficulties through depression, alcoholism, and relationships that were growing rapidly apart. But Paul, by himself, was getting worse for wear. I wrote a bunch of stuff, like I do every record, but I would spend half the time in the bathroom doing drugs. I'd try to play, and I'd fall out of my chair a couple of times and fall asleep in the middle of tracking a fucking song. It was pretty bad. I was severely depressed, because after Iowa, we were sick of each other, and there was so much hate going around. I didn't feel that way. I wasn't mad at anybody, but everyone else was. And I kind of felt like, oh fuck, my family is moving away from each other. I thought the band might break up. I was like, what would I do? This has been the best thing that ever happened to me. I've never wanted to leave this. I hear someone say, fuck it, I'm quitting, I'm out. And that would fucking freak me out. I'd be like, fuck, what are we gonna do now? Those problems always worked themselves out, but I'd dig myself in deeper holes. And then finally, all that had to stop, or I knew I was gonna die. But once you get to a certain point, it's fucking so hard going through withdrawal. It's so bad. It's not that you don't want to quit. You just can't. In the month of June, the news was reporting Paul Gray's arrest. Slipknot bassist Paul Gray has been arrested on drugs and drink driving charges after a car accident. Paul Gray, who wears a pig mask on stage, collided with a car after going through a red light on Sunday in his hometown of Des Moines, Iowa, police confirmed. When the police arrived on the scene, Gray's behaviour was said to be erratic. Paul Gray was driving a red 2001 Porsche. He ran a red light and collided with another car. He appeared to be impaired, said a Des Moines police spokesman. He tried to write a check for $1,000 to the other driver. That's when they called the police. Police searching the car found 2 syringes, a vial containing a powdery substance, and a small baggie of marijuana. The powder later tested positive for cocaine. Gray failed 2 alcohol tests at the scene and was arrested for possession of marijuana, cocaine, and drug paraphernalia, as well as operating while impaired, the US term for drink driving. He was reported to have consented to a urine test used by US police to detect drugs, but the results will not be known for several weeks. Police said he posted bail of $3,800 and is expected to return to court to hear formal charges. This is what I think would be the beginning of the breaking point around a difficult process during Paul's life. Volume 3, The Subliminal Verses, was released in May 2004 to widespread critical acclaim. Slipknot were becoming household names by this point. They were heavily touring once again to promote the album, which remained so successful. They toured the album ended in late November 2005. During the tour, they have recorded their first live album in their discography, 9.0 Live, in support of the album. After their longest tour at the time, the band went for another hiatus, returned to their projects. Sean created Dirty Little Rabbits. Joey became a producer for 3 Inches of Blood's album, Fire Up the Blades, as well as a touring musician with different bands. Sid decided to return back to his solo career as DJ Starscream. I ended up going to rehab halfway through Volume 3. It was down the street from where we were doing the record. The band had an intervention on me. Going through rehab kept me good for a little while, and then we got back out on the road, and I just knew too many people, and I started using a lot again. I had some near-death experiences, nothing I'm going to go into any detail about, and I had a few more stints of rehab here and there. I got left in rehab at the end of the arena tour with Shadows Fall and Lamb of God. It was the same place Lindsay Lohan went. I missed the last 6 shows of the tour. All of our techs can play guitar and bass, and they all learned the songs and filled in for me. And that's when I really started going, fuck, I need to figure my shit out. In the aftermath of the second hiatus, around 2008, Slipknot decided to return back to the studio in Iowa instead of Los Angeles, like what they did on the Volume 3 album. This time, for sadly the final time in the classic lineup of the band, they were making their album All Hope Is Gone with Ugly Kid Joe guitarist Dave Fortman. This is an experience to think about at the time that could have worked out for a much more comfortable, better mindset for the whole band, but the truth was Paul's mental health and his severe addiction was reaching his downward spiral state. Corey Taylor did spend a lot of time with Paul around that period of the band's development of the album, as well as with stuff outside of the studio. Most of the band members have recorded their parts separately instead of being together. Everything seemed bigger and better and less dysfunctional. Before, if someone was pissed off about something, he held it in and just stew in it. Now it's like, hey, let's fucking go. I'm fucking pissed, man. Why did you do that? And we get the problems hashed out right away. I love everybody in this band. They're my fucking family. But families fight. And when you hold in shit and start resenting people, it can turn really ugly. We all speak our minds now more than we used to. Some of the songs are the heaviest we've ever written. Some are the most melodic, some are the most emotional and musical. It's really cool. You can only do so much with writing blazing fast heavy songs your whole career, but you just wind up painting yourself into a fucking corner. We can do a song with piano and Corey singing, and we can put it out as Slipknot, and people will hear it as Slipknot. And that's what I'm actually really stoked about. The future is wide open now, whereas during the Iowa cycle, it seemed like we were painting ourselves into a corner. Just because of the experience around it, it has nothing to do with a lot of the music, but I have to say my least favourite is All Hope Is Gone. So it was really difficult to get that album made in the first place, and it was difficult to get everyone on the same page going out on the road. It was a miserable 2 years. One of the only reasons I can look back fondly on it is I got to spend a lot of time with Paul Gray. So other than that, the rest of it was so much hard work and pulling teeth. I have a hard time listening to that album without conjuring up terrible memories of what happened. At one point, Sean was called by Paul to say that he was too sick to come to the studio with the band. This inspired Jim, Sean, and the others to create the song Till We Die, which many Slipknot fans have called the song as like a tribute to the band's bass player. It's becoming really, really fragile, and I couldn't believe that it led to this point. There was a real fear that he wasn't doing well. I remember when I set up a photo shoot, that was a bad day. He was in a bad place. I can remember Jim and I coaching him through some stuff, and I didn't realise until years later, but it was over then. Did I ever really think a friend was going to die? No, you just don't put that together because you're young. On August the 26th that year, All Hope Is Gone was released to positive reception. The band once again did go through another world tour to promote All Hope Is Gone. It was a 9-leg tour, and it was finished in late 2009. Paul's last ever gig with Slipknot was on Halloween in Las Vegas. After the era of the All Hope Is Gone tour, Sean detailed very painful experiences on Paul's deterioration. It's safe to say that when Slipknot takes time off, Paul was the one person worst affected by the other side bands. It's not that he didn't like them, of course he did. He went and saw Stone Sour, Murder Dolls, but when Paul would come home, he would get really sad because all he'd want to do was Slipknot. It's what he was born to do. It's what he'd love to do. It's the thing he'd love more than anything. Now, Paul had been recommended by his doctor at the time, Daniel Baldy, with a medicational drug of Xanax, which treats people who have anxiety and depression, but a big danger around that very high classified drug. It is highly fatal for anyone to be so addicted to it. Paul's wife, Brenna, was pregnant with their first and only child. One of them was playing golf 2 minutes away from our house, but couldn't come. Nobody else cared. Nobody was involved. They told me it was my problem. This led into new allegations in the interview with Jim Root, one of Slipknot's guitarists, to know if the band has shown a lot of the care and admiration for Paul. It was something really hard for the whole band. Jim had a lot to say around these allegations. I think she's probably going to say whatever it is she thinks she needs to say for the lawyers to hear. You know, I mean, Paul was our brother. Paul was very close to us. We tried putting Paul into treatment numerous times. We took him off of tours, and we had interventions with him. I would stop by at Paul's house with my ex-girlfriend, and he'd still be in bed. There are a lot of circumstances and dynamics there, and I'm sure that she is hurting very deeply and trying to find some way to maybe put the blame somewhere. At the end of the day, Paul was sick, and Paul had a problem, and we were there for Paul. Paul wasn't always available. I feel bad. I feel bad for the whole situation. And he responded to the comment if the band did care about him. Absolutely. He's our friend. He's our brother. He's our compatriot. He's always going to be a part of our lives, no matter what. What can you do? If you have a sickness, you got to fix that sickness. But you can't keep putting somebody into treatment over and over and over again. What are you supposed to do? Babysit someone and live with them? What can you do? Through the time of Paul's life, even once when Slipknot was taking a break, he would always do his best to be sociable, playing around with musicians, jamming to different music, and he tried to form a big supergroup prior to what happened. It was going to be a supergroup called Hail with various members of different bands. Unfortunately, it did not come to fruition. On the 24th of May, 2010, less than 2 years after the release of All Hope Is Gone, inside a hotel room at almost 11 a.m., Paul Gray passed away. He passed at the age of 38 from an accidental overdose of fentanyl and morphine. The day after, the band, along with Paul's widow and Paul's brother, attended a very quick, small press conference to pay tribute and mourn the loss of their very special, dear friend. In September of 2010, Slipknot released Sicknesses, a double disc release that features a recording of their 2009 headlining performance at the Download Festival, as well as a 45-minute behind-the-scenes documentary created by Clown and the 4 music videos from All Hope Is Gone. It was released to dedicate the memory of Paul. In 2011, Slipknot began their Memorial World Tour, started on the 17th of June and ended on the 18th of August 2012. Bass player Donnie Steele played along with the band, but he was off stage. It was a 5-leg tour, 12 shows in Europe, 1 show in South America, 7 shows in Australia, and 32 shows in North America. An effigy of Paul Gray stood between Craig and Joey's drum kit. The effigy included Paul Gray's self-titled mask, his self-titled jumpsuit, and his left-handed bass guitar beside it. This was the last Slipknot tour to feature drummer Joey Jordison. As a musician, he brought absolute integrity. When he pulled on a guitar, a transformation kicked in. His eyebrows would go down, his brain would switch off, and the music sang through him. He played bass and guitar left-handed, and there was something about his muting, a weird sort of backwards quality. It's so easy to be generic or cheesy in metal, and Paul never was. There was just something huge coming through him. I just miss him, you know. I miss him so much sometimes that it doesn't feel like he's gone. And there are times when I'm thinking and he's in my train of thought and I have to stop myself and go, oh God, he's not here. But you know, there's not a day that goes by that I don't miss him. Not even as far as the band goes. I wish that he was there to watch his daughter grow. In 2014, 6 years after the release of All Hope Is Gone, the band released their 5th studio album with a brand new lineup, Point 5 The Grey Chapter. My approach isn't the same as Paul's. I can't be him and never will be. Every player is ultimately born different. That said, if you listen to Paul's note choices on Vermilion, he was all over the shop and it sounded great. I wanted to try things like that. This video was absolutely difficult for me sometimes because, like I said, I have done my best, but it made me realize about the life of not only Paul as a person, but the life of a musician who deserved a lot of the admiration, the influence, and the love. I think Paul didn't realize that he was getting so much of the acclaim as a renowned bassist. It is very hard for anybody to not only be a musician, but to struggle through a lot of mental health issues. Mental health is very important. Just because you are a praised, beloved musician does not mean that you should not avoid the actual true self of yourself. In my opinion, Paul was and always is one of the greatest and one of my most favourite bass players of all time. Besides the founding moment of Slipknot from Sean and Joey, Paul was a very special innovator. He was one of these important people who definitely brought the life and the specialty of Slipknot's originality, even before the classic lineup of Slipknot's history came to the world. A legend that deserved to be one of the best, and he is one of the most motivational, passionate, and wonderful human beings in the metal world. My heart goes out to the band, his friends, his family, and as always, to the fans. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you have any admiring comments that you would like to share about Paul or this era of Slipknot, please address it in the comments down below. And as always, I will keep you guys and maggots posted for more videos in the near future.